Is this the dagger?
G'day guys, JB here coming at you with essentially a mid-season review for the 2024-25 NBA season. We're going to cover up as to where the teams sit at the All-Star break, their run coming into the All-Star break, their best player to the All-Star break, and just whether I thought anyone on their team should have indeed been an All-Star. I did vote throughout the voting period, but generally we'll leave all of my final decisions on who I think should be an All-Star until the week of. A lot of things change, a lot of things stay the same, but I do think the best way to go about it is definitely waiting until that final point. It generally will tend to expose a few people as well as to who is really paying attention, who is not paying attention, where different people sit in the grand scheme of things. There are a couple of contenders in the sense of where the All-Stars sit, and there's a little bit of a summary as well of guys that would have just missed out on selection. So without further ado, let's get into it. Let's get into the mid-year wrap for the 24-25 NBA season. The Atlanta Hawks, 26-29 to the All-Star break, 4-5 in their last 9 games heading in, and dropping down to 8th in the Eastern Conference. Trae Young in those 9 games leading into the All-Star break, 28 points, 2.2 rebounds, 11.7 assists, so high production from a points and assist standpoint there. Of course, we know he's not a great defender, and turnovers galore. Personally would have had Trae Young as an All-Star myself, certainly ahead of the likes of an Evan Mobley, a Tyrese Halliburton, a Jalen Brunson, a Tyler Hero, and even a Darius Garland and a Jaylen Brown. Really nice season for him so far. For Atlanta, though, they just continue to sit by the wayside. They're mid-Atlanta, generally around the league, and an effort like that going into the last 9 games to the All-Star break very much points to that as well. I don't think they're going to grow too much more. They did show some upside, but I think they're a little bit disgruntled, particularly releasing DeAndre Hunter in a trade, moving him over to Cleveland, and particularly moving on Bogdanovic as well. Interesting times for the Hawks, but yeah, I see them as being middle of the pack moving forward. To Boston, they just started to flex their muscles a little bit heading into the All-Star break. 39-16 record on the season, 71 through their last 8 to the All-Star break, and second in the conference. Jason Tatum continuing to be one of the standout players on the season, whether you like it or not. 27.8 points, 7.1 rebounds, and 6.3 assists going into the All-Star break. 0.5 steals, 0.8 blocks on 2.4 turnovers. And I still have him sitting head and shoulders as the best player in the Eastern Conference this year. Now, I know Boston's winning games, but for me, clearly head and shoulders. And I think Jaylen Brown, again, probably did enough to warrant All-Star selection. Certainly a few people in that mix there. But yeah, a really nice start to the season for Boston and for Tatum. Good little rest period for them. They'll be able to regroup. If they can get injuries intact and continue to play well, it'll be a matter of seeing whether Cleveland can hold out. I think they're part of a 2-horse race right now in the East, Boston being one of them. We'll touch on the Cavs very soon, but there's no reason Boston certainly can't be there to defend their title come the NBA Finals. The Brooklyn Nets had a really strange sort of a run into the end of the All-Star game. Still 14 off the pace of 500, 20-34 on the season, but 6-1 in their final 7 games, moving them to 12th in the conference. Nick Claxton, huge in that sense there defensively as well. Consistently, probably been their best player all year, along with a Cam Johnson. 12.7 points, 6.9 rebounds, 1.6 assists to go 0.9 steals, 3.1 blocks and 1.4 turnovers. So a nice, efficient couple of weeks there for Claxton. I don't know, for Brooklyn, they could put in a mountain of work if they wanted to try and really push towards a play-in. I don't know what they're going to get out of it, though. The big thing for them, though, on the moving piece, ultimately, is that Ben Simmons is gone. Ben Simmons is out of there. He has gone to the Clippers, part of the big news there. So that's certainly going to free up a bit of space for them from a contract buyout standpoint. Not ideal, but it does get him off the team and certainly gets this team back into a rebuild, a genuine rebuild. So Brooklyn looking to lay some foundations for the future. Charlotte Hornets, nothing impressive about them. 13-39 on the season. You're wondering why LaMelo Ball was questionable as an all-star selection. I'll be honest with you, I'm looking at everybody on my list. I had 15 potential candidates as All-Stars in the East. I had one guy, would have been a 16th, but clearly ineligible due to injuries. And not one of them was LaMelo Ball, and I am quite comfortable in that. 1-8 in their 9 games leading into the All-Star break. The second worst team in the conference, next to Washington. Miles Bridges, the best player in their 9 games. 21.6 points, 9 rebounds, 4.1 assists, 0.6 steals, 0.7 blocks, and 1.9 turnovers. I certainly can't say that it was his fault, but everyone should know my opinion on Miles Bridges at this point. Not really sure what Charlotte are going to do, where they're heading, what they've got around them to really justify a low draft pick to build upon. They don't really have an out-and-out star that's committed, and they don't have any consistency. They're just wallowing in their own filth. The Chicago Bulls, an interesting case and study. They have decided to completely move on from their scoring duo that has brought them very, very mediocre success over the last few years. A lot of high points for Bulls fans as far as individual highlights and some exciting scoring games. But Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan are now both gone. Obviously, DeRozan at the start of the season, LaVine in the trade deadline, and ironically has ended up teaming up with DeRozan in Sacramento. For the Bulls, though, 22-33 at this point in the season, 2-6 in their 8 games leading into the All-Star break, 10th in the conference. They remain a consistent contender for a play-in spot there. Josh Giddey played in all of those 8 games, 15.9 points, 5.5 rebounds, 4.8 assists, 1.1 steals, 2 blocks on 2.3 turnovers. A guy who can lead the floor and has quite a good dynamic ability on both sides of it. But for the Bulls now, they need to refocus on the future. They have a couple of young stars they can do that with. What they do with Vucevic, I'm not too sure. He has been consistent for them all year. But Giddey and Kobe White are clearly who they're investing in moving forward. Desonmu, another guy as well. We'll see exactly what's to come for the Bulls. The Cleveland Cavaliers, they continue to be one of the leaders in the 2-horse race that is the Eastern Conference for me right now. 44-10, 7-1 in their 8 games leading into the All-Star breaks. First in the conference. They have got a shared workload on both sides of the ball that has put them in contention as one of the 2 best teams in the regular season so far. Evan Mobley, a guy who deserved an All-Star selection in my book. 20.5 points, 10.3 rebounds, 3.8 assists in those 8 games closing out to the All-Star break. 0.5 steals, 2.1 blocks and 1.4 turnovers. One of the most consistent players all season on both sides of the ball. Donovan Mitchell, I think, still clearly the leader of this team, and he's been phenomenal. Doesn't get enough credit. Evan Mobley, sensational, and Darius Garland, one of their 3-headed monsters there. A team that certainly deserved 3 All-Stars in my book. That's how well they've been playing. They are one of the 2 leaders to come out of the East, and I seriously struggle to see anyone else other than them in Boston being in the Eastern Conference Finals right now. They are on a tear. The break will do them well. Over to the Pistons, and they are looking all right. I mean, this is a team that had a case, and I've said this all year, they had a case as being genuinely the worst team to ever step on a basketball floor in the NBA last year. They've now turned that around. They're a top 6 team at the All-Star break in the East. They look like they're going to play playoffs. One of the biggest turnarounds I know everyone's going to look at record, but when you look at the turnaround of the fortunes of this franchise, one of the biggest turnarounds in recent league history. 6-3 in the 9 games leading to the All-Star break. Tobias Harris, their best player, and a key veteran that's come in and really reshaped the culture. 17.9 points, 4.9 rebounds, 1.3 assists to go, 1.4 steals, 1 block, less than a turnover. Ultimately, the leader of this team right now has been Cade Cunningham. Has a genuine top 10 MVP case for me, let alone top 10 player in the league. Obviously, that varies depending on your criteria. But I think Detroit have been sensational. They've been a revelation. They're actually fun to watch. Be interesting to see how they go over the next couple of years, and certainly how they close out the season. Can their young legs hold on? But really positive stuff for the Pistons to the All-Star break. To the Pacers, a team that has slowly crawled up and crawled out of a hole and started to make a little bit of noise in the East for anyone who's actually paying attention to the league and paying attention to basketball in general. 5-3 in their 8 games leading into the All-Star break, and while it's not phenomenal, it's still 2 above 500. They're 7 overall above 500. They're also top 4 in the East. They're actually playing better than a Miami. They're playing better than a Milwaukee, and at the moment they're clear of Orlando. And that's sort of where I thought they would fall as a team. Siakam so far, thought he should have been an all-star. I think he's been their best player this year. He's certainly shown that in the last 2 months. Halliburton as well for me. Not going to be a popular opinion. Thought he should have been an all-star as well. Done enough this season to get there. But Siakam, through those last 8 games before the break, 23.8 points, 6.8 rebounds, 3.3 assists, 1.3 steals on 0.9 blocks, heading to a little over a turnover, showing the star-studded stuff that he was displaying up in Toronto, and again, the stuff that really got the Indiana Pacers moving last year. Spoken to a couple of Pacers fans. They don't know if they're going to go further than the semis of the conference finals, but the fact that a team looked like it was going to miss the play-in tournament now looks like it's going to be a semi-finalist. Big feather in the cap. Big final 25 or so games for them for the remainder of the year. The Miami Heat finally had their ultimate saga come to an end over the trade period. Jimmy Butler, no more. He is out. He is a Golden State Warrior. And Andrew Wiggins, the notable replacement for him, along with a couple of other different contracts as well, going over to the Heat. They're 25-8 and 28, I should say. 2-6 in their last 8 games, hitting the All-Star break, 9th in the conference, which is kind of strange to say because it looked like they were going to have a real uptick post-Jimmy. But I reckon there's a couple of chemistry things for them to fit in there, a genuine pecking order to be established and a culture to be rebuilt. Nikola Jovic, 12.9 points, 3.8 rebounds, 3.4 assists. Consistently their best player across those 8 games. 0.6 steals, 0.1 blocks on 2.1 turnovers. I thought Tyler Hero has been their best player all year. This has been easily his best season, and I genuinely felt he had a case as an all-star. While I do value the MVP being a winner, I can certainly see why players on lesser teams get votes. Hero being one of those for mine. Thought he's had a standout year. We'll see what the Heat can do minus Jimmy Butler. See what sort of chemistry they're able to build there in their final 25 to 30 games of the year. The Milwaukee Bucks, 3-6 in their last 9 games heading to the All-Star break. Hit a bit of a skid there and managed to be still 5 games above 500, 29 and 24 in the season. 5th in the conference, which, certainly looked like they were going to be a top 3, potential top 2 team. But again, it comes down to the absolute run that Giannis has been on, which is why he's been one of the most valuable players in the conference, let alone the league. And why he's been, one of the recommendations for probably a 3rd finish in the MVP is the consensus for the media this year. For me, Gary Trent Jr., their most consistent player, and again, I do pick these players based on playing all games, your best abilities, availability. 11.8 points, 2.9 rebounds, 1.8 assists to go, 1.1 steals, and 0.1 blocks. Kyle Kuzma actually making the move over to the Bucks as Chris Middleton said goodbye, one of their championship players and the second option, one of the keys to the kingdom there in 2021. So a big loss for the Bucks there, but I think a nice gain in Kuzma. He's a proven championship player, a proven supporting cast member, and I think this team is going to fit in well for him. What can the Bucks do post All-Star break? They're going to need to make a run towards that top 3. For the Knicks, they just keep plodding along, 36-18, 3rd in the conference on the season. They have clearly been the 3rd best team in the East. I think there's been real clear category so far in the East. Cavs clearly at number 1. There's no doubt at number 2, clearly the Boston Celtics, and I think clearly at number 3 has been the New York Knicks. I think Karl Anthony Towns has been their best player this year. I certainly think Jalen Brunson had an all-star case and should have been an all-star indeed. And why not when you look at how he finished off in that stretch? 28.1 points, 2.6 rebounds, and 8.1 assists in that 5-2 record closing out to all-star break. 1 steal, 0.3 blocks on 3 turnovers. The Knicks don't have an identity crisis, but it is a matter as well of managing who's able to get the shots up when it matters. There's clear that the Knicks, and I feel that Brunson is very much a Devin Booker type player in the sense of the fate of the team probably rides on his ability to be more malleable in the side. It doesn't necessarily mean he's the best player, but I think his value speaks with where he fits and what he can do for the team. And they've been riding the fortunes there, and I think Brunson's very happy to have a big that's stretching that floor. The Knicks in the back end of the season, they're going to be dangerous to deal with. Thinking of teams that could be dangerous to deal with, they're 27-29 right now. I mean, this is the worst they've looked in almost 2 years as a team. 3-5 in the last 8 games, but they're still 7th in the conference, the Orlando Magic. They're going to be very thankful for the All-Star break. They've got injuries and soreness galore. They need rests for their players. But when you've got someone like a Franz Wagner coming back in, who started the season red hot, was one of the 3 best players in the league for the first 6 to 8 weeks of the season, I defy anyone to argue me with that there. He was just dominant. When you're going to pair him up with someone like a Paolo Banchero, who had a massive season last year, for me was an MVP level player, an All-NBA level player. I think they're going to be really dangerous here, Orlando. They're 27 and 29, doesn't speak enough to what they can do in the final, let me have a look here, 56 games, what they can do in their last 24, 25 outings. Wagner heading into the All-Star break, 26.6 points, 5.9 rebounds, 3.3 assists, 1 steal, 0.3 blocks, and 1.8 turnovers. Still here have him as their best player on the season. I think he's going to play a crucial role in the back end. The chemistry of this Orlando team could still see them shoot into that top 6 and maybe make things interesting in a playoff situation. Philadelphia, an interesting case study. They are a tied equal record with Brooklyn, and despite all the fluctuations of both sides, I would say, strangely enough, the Sixers have had clearly a better year despite the record. 3-7 in their last 10, 11th in the conference. As I said, only separated really head-to-head there with Brooklyn. Kelly Oubre Jr., I thought was their best player in those last 10 games. 17 points, 7.7 rebounds, 2.4 assists, 1.7 steals, 0.6 blocks, and 1.2 turnovers. Looks to be a little bit of infighting and chemistry issues right now, and I think it's because the guys that are on the front line consistently, and I think Tyrese Maxey had a case as an all-star this year, don't get me wrong. He's been consistently their best player this year, but it's clear that guys like him probably aren't voicing it as much, but Kelly Oubre certainly is. Frontline players that are there trying to get the bang for their buck, trying to make the most, and you've got guys who are on $200 million contracts who can't turn up, and when they do, refuse to play good basketball. Philly's in a hell of a spot. I don't see them doing much. If they get into a plane, they're wasting a space. The eruption that we were expecting from Philadelphia is going to come from their fan base, and certainly not from the quorum that is their basketball club. Toronto Raptors certainly, I think, have shown more promise than someone like a Brooklyn and a Philadelphia who's in front of them. It was because of players like a Scotty Barnes, who I think has been their best player and despite limited action had a solid case of being an all-star this year. I would value his case as an all-star well above that of a LaMelo Ball. That's the impact that he's had on his team. It's just going to be interesting to see how it works. Brandon Ingram having joined this team now is going to be crucial. Signing an extension adds a third dynamic, an Emmanuel Quickley, an RJ Barrett, a Scotty Barnes, a Brandon Ingram, and then you put a Jakob Poeltl, who's a really dynamic centre. I like that lineup. That can be an interesting matchup for any team in the Eastern Conference. 17 and 38, 13th in the conference, 3-6 in their last 9 games. Scotty Barnes, nice production there leading in as well, continuing to show why he was the Rookie of the Year and why he has a case as the best player of his draft class. 19.8 points, 6.8 rebounds, 5.4 assists, 1.2 steals, 1.9 blocks on 2.1 turnovers. Once the injuries heal up, once the chemistry gets into things, we'll see what Toronto can do. I certainly hope for Brandon Ingram's case, though, that this really isn't just a matter of, hey, new situation, same situation. We'll see what happens. Finally, over to the Wizards, who got rid of consistently but their best player for the last 3 years. Jonas Valanciunas has disappeared off the team as well, and they are essentially stuck with Bilal Coulibaly and Jordan Poole. And nothing against Bilal Coulibaly, but I wouldn't want to play with a guy who's still scared and jumping at shadows because a former teammate punched him. That's nothing against Jordan Poole. He's had his moments, as you can see. I think he was their best player in those last 9 games. But the Wizards are really bottoming out. They're 9 and 45. They're 15th in the conference. They're the worst team in basketball. 21.1 points, 3.9 rebounds, 4.6 assists to Poole, 0.8 steals, 0.8 blocks on 3.3 turnovers. Poor guy got so confused he thought he was an all-star. Like ridiculous levels of how good he thought he was. But in saying that, if I'm going to look at how Jordan Poole's played this year, got him responsible for 4 wins compared to our big friend over there in Charlotte. I've got LaMelo Ball responsible for 6 wins. They've won 4 more games. Can make a case comparatively. Jordan Poole has had case to be as good as LaMelo Ball on impact this year. No one's going to make it because no one likes facts. You've only got to look at it. We'll see who attends more in the back half of the year. Speaking of back half of the year, you could argue that the back half of this particular team is nothing but an absolute donkey. And depending on how you want to look at it, it's because of how injuries have panned out. The Dallas Mavericks at 30 and 26 to the All-Star break, 8th in the conference, 5 and 4 in their last 9 games, traded away Luka Doncic for Anthony Davis and Max Christie essentially. And everything looked really, really good for Dallas in the first 25 minutes that Anthony Davis was healthy until he went out with an injury. And then you factor in that Daniel Gafford and PJ Washington are now also injured. So Kyrie Irving's gone from playing with one of the most ball-dominant, stat-producing players in league history, a guy who helped get his team to the Western Conference and NBA Finals, respectively, 2 of the last 3 seasons, to being the only guy left on the team. And nothing against Dante Exum, but he's just come back from injury. Najee Marshall, their best player in the last 9 games, 12.2 points, 4.7 rebounds, 2.6 assists, 0.9 steals, 0.3 blocks and a turnover. But that's not going to get it done when you've got a team that thinks they're in a win-now mode. Davis out indefinitely with that injury. Fortune favours the brave, but I tell you what, you'd be absolutely petrified right now if you're the Dallas Mavericks. On the other side of things, though, a nice little turnaround for Denver heading into the All-Star break. 36-19. They sit at 3rd in the conference, and I feel that the level of consistency they're playing at and their experience probably has them as one of the 2 leaders coming out of the West. And an 8-1 run in their final 9 games before the All-Star break, crucial on that. Also crucial is having the most consistent big man in the league, one of the most high-volume producers offensively in league history, and a guy who's improved on the defensive end. Not great on the defensive end, but has proved on the defensive end. This guy's probably going to have a chance at winning a 4th MVP. If they finish top 3, make a run into the top 2, we've got a guy who's going to have a genuine case for MVP because he's statistically, as a 3-time MVP, producing his best season ever. Jokic leading in that 9-game run, 28.7 points, 10.3 rebounds, 10.6 assists to go with 1.9 steals and 0.7 blocks on 3.1 turnovers. Dallas could be a team that could fire at the right time. They've played 55 games. They've got 27 games to get it right and get a seed, and you just never know. You just have to be in it to win it. Denver are a team that can very much be in it and win it. The Golden State Warriors, a team that certainly can be in it to win it. They sit above 500, 10th in the conference, 6-4 in their 10 games leading into the All-Star break, and the biggest acquisition they could have possibly made, both apparently from a known available player market. We'll put that out there, known player available market, because nobody had a clue that Anthony Davis and Luka Doncic were going to swap jerseys. They managed to acquire him, and not only from an on-court production standpoint, known player, but certainly the biggest personality in what if available. Jimmy Butler signed immediately with an extension to the Golden State Warriors, averaging around $61 million a year. That's going to be interesting. The dynamic with him and Steph is working quite interesting as well. I'm liking what's being produced there. I just don't know exactly the stability you're going to have. I think Steph managed to sneak an all-star selection closer in my book, if I'm going to go look over that there as well. Very much close to that there. Of course, you could argue Anthony Davis an all-star prior to his trade, and I don't think anyone else there from Dallas, outside of obviously Denver with Jokic. But Brandon Podziemski, their best player through those 10 games, rounded 14, 5 and 4, 1.5 steals, 0.1 blocks on 1.5 turnovers. Interesting to see the dynamic in the Warriors, particularly with Draymond Green moving forward. Over to the Houston Rockets. They're 4th in the conference, 3-7 in their 10 games leading the All-Star break. Suggests they did have some tired legs, and we saw this a little bit towards the play-in tournament where they apparently just weren't up to sniff in the semi-final, and maybe this is what they've been talking about with Houston needing a couple of more years. I think they're ahead of schedule. I think much like Orlando, they're ahead of schedule. They just have a couple of more years to really hit that dynamic, but still 34-21 through 55 games to the All-Star break, 4th in the conference. Jalen Green, a nice run of play there, 21.4 points, 4.5 rebounds, 3.7 assists, 0.4 steals and 0.4 blocks to go with 3.1 turnovers. A guy who, for me, would have just missed out on All-Star selection, being Jalen Green, heading into that break. I think Şengün certainly deserved it, and I think Green was a genuine contender. Put it this way, I think Jalen Green in another conference would have made it. That's how well I think he's been playing. For Houston, a good time to have a bit of a break, a good time to reset, go back to the drawing board, try and get back on a winning run. They're 13 above 500. It's going to be a catastrophe for them to miss the top 6 in the West. It's just going to be a matter of seeing where they fall, what kind of matchup they get, and what kind of experience they can gain heading into the playoffs. The Clippers made one of the more interesting moves at the deadline. They've managed to acquire Ben Simmons. I don't know how that's going to work out. I don't know what kind of passion he's going to have. And I don't know how Ben Simmons, James Harden, and Kawhi Leonard are all going to manage on the team, where one of them is an absolute out-and-out all-time playoff leader when he's fit. Ben Simmons, previous Defensive Player of the Year candidate, All-Star, All-NBA player when he's fit and committed. And James Harden, a former MVP, but doesn't like the limelight in the postseason like Ben Simmons. Crazy dynamic. You add Norman Powell into the mix, who I think should have been an All-Star. It's ridiculous that he wasn't. And I think a lot of that comes down to the fact he plays with the Clippers and you can find it out. But another guy who's played really well is Zubac. Clippers, 31-23 record, 5-3 in their 8 leading into the All-Star break, 6th in the conference. Zubac, really strong going into that there. Around at 16-13 with 2.5 assists almost per game over those 8 games. 1.5 steals, 0.8 blocks on 1.3 turnovers. Having what I think has been his best season of his career. Still, I think it's an absolute indictment that Norman Powell wasn't an All-Star. And I can't wait to see what sort of dynamic you have with injured players on a team that wants to make a playoff run, with a leader that, if he's fit, can get the job done, but has guys next to him who don't like the bright lights. Awfully weird dynamic for the Clippers. Oh, and they also acquired Bogdan Bogdanovic from Atlanta, which isn't too bad. I don't mind the shooting on that one there. It's going to be interesting to see, again, just how that fits in with that entire eclectic dynamic of disgruntled All-Star that wasn't an All-Star, injured, unreliable stars, and guys that don't like the bright lights when the playoffs turn up. Really interesting mix. Over to the Lakers, 12 games above 500, 5th in the conference, 32-20 for the season, 6-2 in their last 8 going into the All-Star break, and of course, the biggest player-for-player trade arguably in NBA history, to obtain Luka Doncic for Anthony Davis and Max Christie. Essentially is what happened there. Do I like the fact that you're going to get one of the big players in the league in a big market? Of course the league's going to tell you that's a good thing, and obviously from a popularity standpoint for the league that helps in the continental US. But for all of us outside of the continental US, he's Luka Doncic regardless of whether he's in a Lakers uniform or a Charlotte uniform. The dynamic the Lakers now have to deal with, and there's more fallout from that as well, the dynamic the Lakers have to deal with is they have arguably the 2 most ball-dominant players in the history of the NBA on the one team, neither of which are willing to commit defensively. Now, who they're going to go to, I don't know, because you don't have a reliable jumper between them either. So, defensive issues, potential offensive issues, who's going to touch the ball, I don't know. You also have the fact you had the rescinded trade with Mark Williams, who didn't pass a physical. So that changed a lot of dynamics as well. And the Lakers ended up signing Alex Len instead. Austin Reeves, their best player in those 8 games leading in though. 22.8 points, 5.9 rebounds, 6.8 assists, 1.5 steals, 0.4 blocks and 2.5 turnovers. I had LeBron and AD as their All-Stars. LeBron was not fit enough to play. Make of that as you wish. Over to the Memphis Grizzlies, and probably the biggest turning point for the Memphis Grizzlies is the fact that Marcus Smart has left the team. Was traded to the Washington Wizards. And I did miss that in the Wizards coverage before. It's going to be a massive loss for them. I think he's been a real good culture set, but if they're on a good wicket there and a good spot and they're able to really get Smart moving into a more dynamic role with a team that is going to utilise him, then, you know, maybe it's not a bad move at all. Particularly from a rotation, if he's struggling to get in for a team here that's being a contender, there's no point taking up a spot when they can sort of do an OKC and build on a bit of youth in future drafts to maintain this run. But 36-18, second in the conference leading into the All-Star break, 5-2 in their last 7. Jaren Jackson Jr. continues to have an All-NBA level season. 24.3 points, 5 rebounds, 2.6 assists, 1 steal, 1.6 blocks on 3 turnovers leading in. Should have been an All-Star for me. Yeah, just that kind of level of player from both sides of the ball. Should get an All-NBA nod, should get an All-Defensive nod, should garner some serious MVP consideration. He won't, because it all comes down to, you know, mid-level teams playing really well because they're just a really good team. They don't factor in individual performance, which is why I laugh at the fact that you can't have the best player on the best team, but you also can't consider a guy to be playing really well on a mid-team. It makes no sense to me. Jaren Jackson Jr. has been huge. Minnesota Timberwolves, 31-25, managed to really lift their fate and change the direction of this team over the last 4 to 6 weeks. 6-4 in their last 10 to the 7th spot in the conference there. Jaden McDaniel's a really nice week leading in and has just been Mr. Consistency throughout the year. 15.8 points, 7.2 rebounds, 2.8 assists to go 1.2 steals and 0.9 blocks on 1.6 turnovers. Anthony Edwards, clearly their best player, and for me, he's really starting to make a top 10 MVP case. Really starting to make an All-NBA second team case. He's had a really nice season. With the amount of guards that are available and the way that they do the 2 and the 3, fair chance that he may get relegated to the third team. Particularly when you look at the guards that are performing this year, but a really nice effort by him. I think Minnesota can be a top 6 team at best. I just don't know about their dynamics at the moment. You've got someone like a Julius Randle who really fit in early, but now sort of seems to be struggling. Someone like an Ant who was struggling, but now is fitting in, and they're just trying to find a balance on that. I don't know where the balance is going to be, but it's certainly something they need to work on, and work on fast, particularly with the closing stages of the season. The Pelicans, one of the worst teams in the league. You know, they're comparable to Charlotte, and Charlotte's not a really good team. They're pretty awful. The difference being is that there's been so much upside to what New Orleans could possibly do, and it just hasn't happened. I mean, Brandon Ingram's gone. Zion Williams is still there. The other issue is, though, that you're not going to see Dejounte Murray for another 18 months. The guy that very much could have helped turn this around. A guy who looked like he was the best player in Atlanta for pretty much the end of last season is now no more. With his injury, with his Achilles injury, he's out for 18 months. You would assume that he's not going to be there next season either. So it's going to come down to the likes of a Trey Murphy, 1-7 in their last 8, but he's had 27.3 points, 5.6 rebounds and 6 assists, 0.9 steals, 0.4 blocks on 2.4 turnovers. He shows the ability to be a key player on any given team on both sides of the ball, but when you don't have any supporting cast for a young guy like this who can be a little overexposed on the defensive end, even though he is a good defender, can be a little overexposed when he's forced to take the absolute best defender. It's a real challenge. I think it's something he's going to relish, but for New Orleans, I don't see much more improvement coming from this team. Certainly a bottom feeder to end the year. And we go from absolute bottom feeders, one of the worst teams in the league, to the absolute top of the class. 7-2 in their last 9 games, first in the conference, a 44-10 record for the OKC Thunder over the year. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander just tearing it up. An MVP for me this year. And I think you can make a case he should have won it last year. I got no issues that he didn't. And again, I'd have no issues this year, but I think it's more clear cut than last year. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, 34.3 points, 4.2 rebounds and 6.4 assists in that 9-game stretch heading into the All-Star break. 1 steal, 0.7 blocks on 1.8 turnovers. Just sensational stuff there. Just a really, really nice season. The Thunder, they just keep getting deeper. They've got injury returns, so they're not going to be struggling as much. I think there's just a lot of depth to this team. There's no doubt about it. How much depth? Well, that remains to be seen. But I think they're a genuine contender. They're one of the 2 favourites to come out of the West with Denver, in my opinion. They're the last of the 4 horses in the race. Which is crazy to say at the All-Star break, but barring injury, this is a team that at minimum should be looking at the Western Conference Finals. Over to the Phoenix Suns, 26-28 record, 2-7 in their last 9, 11th in the conference. No genuine moves at the trade deadline, other than getting rid of Nurkic. That was pretty much it. No real changes, no real moves, and it sounds like Kevin Durant's all but out the door at the end of the year, which will leave Devin Booker stranded again. There's one consistency out of all of this. It's Devin Booker. No one's going to point that out, though. Royce O'Neal played in 9 games. That's why he's my preference here for player. 10.3 points, 3.8 rebounds, 2.4 assists, 1 steal, 0.4 blocks on 0.2 turnovers. For me, Devin Booker was the all-star for Phoenix. That's it. Kevin Durant's had a great year. I didn't have him as an all-star. He's had a great year, but I didn't have him as an all-star. For 30,000 points, one of 8 players to ever do it. But when you start to look at what Kevin Durant's resume is right now, he was a top 50 player before he left OKC. He was a top 50 player before 2015 and 2016, in my opinion. That's how good of a player Kevin Durant's been. That's how quick he built his resume. But it's just becoming a real constant factor of issues everywhere he goes right now. The only place I'll give him an exception, because he's proven to be such an issue, has been Draymond Green. But that's yet to be seen. It'll be very interesting to see how that ends up with Jimmy Butler. And then it comes back to Durant once again. The Blazers with an interesting run towards the All-Star break. 6-3 in their last 9. They're now only 9 games below 500. 13th in the conference, and a team that, I'm not saying they're going to do anything special, but they would look a little bit different in the Eastern Conference, let's put it that way. Anthony Simons continues to be their leading player through those 9 games. 19.8 points, 2.4 rebounds, 6.1 assists, 0.6 steals, 0.2 blocks on 1.8 turnovers. The Blazers were never going to be anything special. They could very well push really, really hard if they want to try and break 500, make a case to be 11th, maybe 10th in the West. I just don't necessarily see how that's going to pan out for them. They've got some nice players. Again, I just think they're pieces that are ready to be farmed off unless they're able to score a nice big piece, which could instantly turn their favours because your lineup changes completely with a genuine number 1. At the moment, they're just going to be middle feeders. Anthony Simons, Shaden Sharp. There's a bit of Scooter Henderson coming in, but Simons and Sharp tend to be the leaders of this team right now, and I think they're going to start to really back them in heading into next year. The Sacramento Kings moving pieces here and there. De'Aaron Fox is gone. He is a San Antonio Spur. Zach LaVine is in, and so is Jonas Valanciunas. Some real dynamics there from a guard position, from a center position. They are wanting to consolidate something here, and they feel they can make a bit of a run in probably a more vulnerable Western Conference. I don't know exactly how much that's going to help. But they certainly could look to make an impact on a team that can make an impact there. DeMar DeRozan in those 9 games, 28-7 for the Kings. I'll touch on that quickly. 28-7 for the Kings through the season, 9th in the conference, 4-5 in their last 9 games. DeMar DeRozan, their best player in those 9. 23 points, 4 rebounds, 4.3 assists, 0.2 steals, 0.4 blocks, and 1.2 turnovers. Very excited to see what kind of dynamic you see under a faster-paced offense out there in Sacramento, particularly when they don't need to be ball dominant. The amount of ball dominance they can go through a Sabonis right now from his facilitation, I think that's what they're trying to do. Spread the scoring, get him facilitating, replicate a little bit of what's going on in Denver. Their defense isn't going to allow that to happen. I think Valanciunas is certainly just a big body backup. But I think Sacramento want to create a bit of a dynamic here, a bit of a unique brand, see what they can do towards the end of the year. To the Spurs, and of course just quickly touching back on Sacramento there, Sabonis the only All-Star for them for me. They have one clear All-Star here, the Spurs, to me. That was Victor Wembanyama. And there's no doubt about that. I mean, we're talking about one of the 5 best players in the NBA this year. Don't know where he sits in my MVP conversation because we don't have a team in the playoffs, but you can work out. This guy's probably going to be pretty high if they do manage to sneak into the postseason, or certainly towards that top 8. Should we get to that point there. The Spurs, 6 games below 500, 23-29, 3-6 in their last 9, 12th in the conference. Stephon Castle continues to break out as a rookie. He's really started to grow on me. Didn't like him early, but he started to show some real promise. 18.4 points, 4.1 rebounds, 3.2 assists, 1.3 steals, and 0.3 blocks on less than 2 turnovers heading into that there. There's going to be 2 huge factors here. Number 1, there's now a spread of scoring with De'Aaron Fox. De'Aaron Fox spreading with Wembanyama, and Chris Paul is huge. Number 2, Chris Paul is a perennial all-defensive candidate for half of his career, one of the better defensive point guards the league's seen, particularly when you factor in his offensive end. You're going to have guys like Stephon Castle learn under him, but you're also now going to have a bit of intuition passed on to a more savvy player in a De'Aaron Fox. It's only going to benefit the Spurs. It's a matter of whether it's going to be a short-term gain or whether there's going to be a little bit of short-term pain for long-term gain. Interested to see the dynamic that is produced there in San Antonio. And finally, we go over to the Utah Jazz, 13-41, one of the 4 worst teams in the league this year. 3-7 in their last 10, 14 in the conference. Keontae George, their best player. 17.2 points, 4.2 rebounds and 6.5 assists, 0.4 steals, 0.2 blocks on 2.9 turnovers. It will not come as a shock that there wasn't anybody from the Utah Jazz in contention for the All-Star game. And that's despite the fact that I can make a case that John Collins, 3 wins to his name for me. Lauri Markkanen, 3 wins to his name. Keontae George consistent throughout the year. But I didn't look at them because I don't think they've been All-Stars. And I don't think this team is capable of producing an All-Star, let alone a fitting lineup right now. Strange dynamic going on in Utah. I don't know what they're doing. The teams that are tanking for Cooper Flag, while it looks good right now, I'm Portland. I'm the only team that wants to do that. They're the only thing with any valuable pieces. Washington, maybe. But if I'm Portland, I'm the one that wants them. And I think they've played themselves out of the game. Utah, they're just there. They're just hanging around. And they're like a bad smell. And you just can't get rid of them. But that's my mid-year review. Of course, we're coming out of the All-Star break. We're going to be getting into action very, very soon on what would eventually be week 17 of the season or thereabouts. And I'll look to resume coverage from there. Who's the surprise packet so far from a team standpoint? Who's a disappointment from a team standpoint? The trade period, pretty big. Who are the winners? Who are the losers? Who do we think we've overrated? Who do we think has been underrated? Keen to know your thoughts and just how you think the end of the season is going to play out. Who are the teams that are going to relish a break and really take off? Who are some teams that, certainly have seen where their team prospect is, are going to settle and certainly fall a bit more by the wayside? Interested to see what you think there. Anyway, guys, that's my mid-year review for the 24-25 NBA season. I'm out.